These things aren't always recorded, but I personally think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that Paddy was really keen to go on the Rommel raid. He knew that would be a key operation in the whole war. And I think that Paddy was resentful of that, and that may have been one of the reasons behind why he did such an outlandish thing.
Around this time, Lieutenant David Stirling was recuperating from wounds in a field hospital, devising a plan to revolutionize modern warfare. Throughout the previous year, Rommel's troops stormed across the North African desert. The retreating Allies were now desperately holding on in Egypt. Stirling believed his plan could stop the German onslaught.
The SAS was needed at that time because Britain was getting pushed back by Rommel and, really had its back up against the wall, really. But Stirling saw that the German and Italian armies had such long lines of communication that if they were hit at small places along the way by groups of 3 or 4 men with explosives or raiding the aerodromes, that they could cause destruction out of all proportion and chaos. I mean, I think in the end there were thousands of troops just running around the desert trying to find just a handful of men.
Stirling's idea was simple: parachute small raiding parties behind enemy lines to launch guerrilla-style attacks. This proposal failed to impress his superiors. Undeterred, Stirling went over their heads and straight to the top. Prime Minister Churchill was delighted at the idea of specially trained troops of the hunting class who could develop a reign of terror based on a butcher and bolt policy.
David Stirling managed to extract the authority to raise a unit and handpick his own people.
Thus was born the Special Air Service, the SAS. Stirling was assigned 66 men and 3 months to prepare.
Quite a lot of them came from his own company in the Scots Guards, who he trained with. That's how he got the first, and most of those who joined the commandos in the early days did so to escape normal army life.
Maine, who was still awaiting court-martial.
Stirling knew Paddy Mayne from the 11th Scottish Commandos, and the action at the Battle of the Litani River, where Paddy Mayne was absolutely outstanding. He forged ahead, got inland and captured headquarters virtually single-handed. David Stirling knew that Paddy Mayne was a superb fighting officer, just the sort of man that he needed to build this force round him.
Arriving at the brig, Stirling asked the Irishman to join his new group. After short consideration, Paddy agreed. Stirling laid down only one condition. He was one officer that wasn't to be hit.
The reason I come to meet Paddy, I was in the long-range desert group, which it was a pretty secret do, because nobody seemed to know anything about it. The whole idea originally of the long-range desert group was to find out what sort of country where a piece of white paper with a line drawn on and a dotted line for a camel train, and that was it. Nobody knew exactly what the going was like. I mean, people think about the desert and they think about sand. Well, there are sand and sand dunes, there's hundreds of miles of them. But not only that, there's hundreds of miles of rocky terrain, valleys, and all sorts of different types of terrain.
In addition, the long-range desert group had the task of providing intelligence on enemy positions and movements. Over time, they acquired a detailed knowledge of the desert. In November 1941, the SAS was assigned their first mission: to destroy Rommel's aircraft fleet at Tobruk, deep inside enemy lines. On the night of the raid, the weather conditions were appalling. Heavy rains, lightning, and gale-force winds. Stirling was advised to cancel, but under immense pressure to justify the worth of the SAS, he decided to go ahead. The mission was a failure before it even got off the ground.
was the position. They weren't anywhere near where they should have dropped. They were about 50 miles out. They didn't drop as they do today, like in sticks, dead easy, drop them all in about half a square mile area. No, they scattered all over the place. With the type of parachute that they were using in those days, you actually hit the ground as though you were building, and the idea was that your knees doubled up like shock absorbers and you rolled over.
And if you landed face down and dragged through the sand got behind your release box and you couldn't release your parachute, and the men were killed by being bashed against the boulders, and there's large rocks dotted about, and sadly they just couldn't get their parachutes off.
Out of 62 who started the mission, only 22 returned. Paddy Mayne survived with only minor injuries, but was devastated to learn that his best friend, Owen McGonigal, had been killed. He wrote to his sister, "I am very tired of this country, especially since Owen landed a loser. It was all right when there was someone you could talk about home with."
While we were waiting for you, there's a very disappointed man, David Sterling, the organiser of it, Lloyd Owen, took him to one side and he said, "Look, take what you've got here, take them back to Cairo, reform, and start all over again. But don't go by aircraft. We'll take you out and we'll bring you back."
2 weeks later, working closely with the Long Range Desert Group, Sterling launched a raid on an airfield at Tamat. This time, not by air, but by jeep. It was the last chance to prove the unit's worth. Paddy Mayne and 5 men approached the airbase under the cover of darkness. Within minutes, they were wreaking havoc, attacking enemy soldiers, destroying planes, petrol dumps, and telephone poles. When they ran out of explosives, Mayne tore out control panels with his bare hands in order to disable even more planes. They carried out a second audacious raid on the same base only days later, this time destroying 25 aircraft. Sterling's tactics were vindicated. Churchill's vision of a butcher and bolt warfare was finally taking shape, and the 26-year-old Paddy Mayne received his first DSO, the Distinguished Service Order. The citation read, "Mayne led this raid in person and himself destroyed and killed many of the enemy. It was due to this officer's courage and leadership that success was achieved."
I've been up in the desert on one of our raids, cut back 3 days ago. It wasn't for my liking. I prefer the long nights, more time to get away. Though my luck was as good as ever, still after aircraft. In the last month, I got 40 odd. I was shot up a couple of times and bar losing some kit which was burnt. I was okay. I had a party last time I was back in the sergeant's mess. I had just broken the sentry in planes, so it was hectic. A dangerous place to go. You're never quite certain what's in your glass.
Over the next months, Mayne and Sterling led their SAS squadrons on a continuous series of raids, sometimes as deep as 300 miles behind the front lines. Exasperated with their successes, Hitler ordered that under no circumstances are they to be treated according to the rules of the Geneva Convention. The Germans began to reinforce their defenses. The SAS had to improvise.
He didn't like being beholden to anybody, which, of course, in the early stages, they would have been beholden, because we used to take them up on our trucks and dump them in the gear, and then we used to go wherever we were going, we would go off. And when they got their own transport, they hijacked some jeeps off a ship in the Suez Canal, a lot of jeeps, and then they got them altered and whatnot.
We rigged them up with 4 Pickers Ks,